Strengthen your understanding of governance and policy design. The 12-week graduate course in public policy begins 10th January 2026. Apply by 30th November 2025 to avail a 10% early bird scholarship.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarthak and I welcome you to All Things Policy. Effective governance requires accountability. Elections are one mechanism for this, but they occur less frequently, once every 5 years. More consistent and frequent feedback from citizens can strengthen accountability and improve government performance. In this episode, we are going to discuss one such initiative. I have with me A Krishna Prasanth. Prasanth is a data scientist with a global consulting firm and volunteers at CIVIC, Citizens Voluntary Initiative for the City. At CIVIC, he has led the development of annual citizen report cards as a tool to build data-driven political accountability. In this episode, we'll talk about this initiative and CIVIC's findings on Karnataka government's performance over the last 2 years. Hi Prashant, welcome to All Things Policy.
Hey, hi Sarthak. Thank you for having me.
So before we talk about Karnataka government's performance over the last 2 years, could you just tell us about this initiative? Right? Could you share more about a citizen's review of Karnataka government initiative and these annual report cards that you have been coming up with? How did all these things come into being? What kind of processes have you followed? And what do we expect in these report cards?
Yeah, sure. So I think I've always been interested in politics growing up. And I also have a degree in economics and I have a background in social science. So even though I have a career in data science now, I couldn't really get the social scientist out of me. And that's how I came into, CIVIC Bangalore, and I've been with the institution over the last 4 or 5 years or so, right? And as part of my experience at CIVIC, what I realized, thinking and delving on democracy is that very rarely in the course of the media cycle, in the course of public discussions, do we talk about critical issues like health, education, agriculture, welfare, and so on, right? The media only covers it in a very sensational manner, right? Which is why, regular interactions between citizens are also very shallow, right? The only time such critical issues are covered are during elections. And even then it's very cursory. It's like, oh, the biggest issue in this election is unemployment. Oh, the biggest issue in this election is jobs. But then that is also very cursory. It's very namesake. It doesn't delve into the nuances, right? It doesn't delve into the real issues. Right. So rarely are there any opportunities, if at all, for any objective and nuanced discussion on the government's performance. Right. So, and this is also the reason why citizens are so polarized today. Right. Because there is no institution today that citizens can trust for an unbiased and objective evaluation of the government. Right. And they're having to rely on political parties and media to tell them the truth. And frankly, their incentives are very different from telling us the truth, right? So that is where CIVIC's report card is like a citizen-led intervention, right? It is an attempt of the citizens, by the citizens, and for the citizens to create an opportunity at least once in a year to, talk about what's happening in the state and what's going well and what's going, what's not going so well and so on, right? So that's about motivation, right? In terms of process, the process is very simple. As part of the citizens review, we have two, so to speak, documents. One is the manifesto review, which looks at what are the promises that the government made on key sectors, again, such as health, education, urban development, environment, right? And we use RTIs and we do public research, online research to assess whether the promise is fulfilled, is it in progress, is it not started, is it failed? So we assign statuses like that to these promises. And the
So
second,
these are the promises that the political parties would have made, right, before getting elected.
Correct. So these are promises that they made as part of their election manifesto, right? And the second is a sectoral review. And the approach there is to take a more nuanced and objective look at what's happened in the sector, because promises are only one half of the story, right? Governments do a lot of other things besides meeting these promises. So this attempt, takes the help of experts, of activists and so on, and gets their views on what the government has done so far. So that is broadly from a process standpoint, right? And that's what we put out this year. So this year we put out a manifesto review, which tells us that the government has fulfilled only 6.7% of the promises that it's made, right? And if you exclude these so-called 5 guarantees, then it's only a meager 3%, right? Which is fairly alarming. And we also have a sectoral review, right, which goes into around 8 sectors, right, does a deep dive into what's been done well and what's not been done well. So again, I think I'd request the listeners to get into these reports.
Yeah. So what I found really interesting about the reports was, for each sector, you have identified what are the things which are commendable, what are things which are, again, there is some questions related to that, it's questionable, problematic, and also certain things which are dangerous.
Yes.
So you have categorized different initiatives based on that.
Yeah.
And when it comes to the promises part, again, one thing that I felt could be improved, maybe, I don't know. So you have listed down all the promises and again evaluated whether these promises have been fulfilled or not. But maybe some promises are more important than the others. Maybe one promise is about which costs you maybe 50,000 crores, maybe impacts crores of people. Another promise can be there which is costing maybe 5 crore and impacts very few people. So both of them should not be given equal weightage, right? If the first promise is fulfilled and the second is not fulfilled, it should not be considered to be equal. So maybe that could be some improvement.
I think we've heard that from other citizens as well, and that's fair feedback. But I think that's the problem, right? You can never be so sure about what is more important than the others and how important is it. So there's no objective way to arrive at that, and that's probably the reason why we've kept it simple. Right.
So since you're talking about the different sectors and how the governments have performed, in India, we have a federal setup. The union government has some specific roles to play. Typically, things like defense, foreign affairs, they're assigned to the union government, while the lower level governments are expected to provide different kinds of services. Service delivery is typically with the state governments and the local governments. When it comes to states, they have the primary responsibility of providing different social services, for instance, education, healthcare. So based on your research, how has the Karnataka government performed in terms of school education? What have been some of the commendable things? What have been some of the major concerns?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, thank you for highlighting that, because what often happens is we as citizens don't know what belongs to the center, what belongs to the state, and more importantly, what is the city government's job, right? And we tend to confuse one thing with the other. So I think it's really important that you pointed this out. So as far as education is concerned, I'll start off with some of the good bits, right? So one good thing that the government has done is it has extended eggs and peanut chickies and bananas to cover students studying in class 9th and 10th as well, right? So that's an attempt, in a sense, to expand nutrition and to extend nutrition to children in class 9th and 10th as well. And they've also increased the frequency of eggs and bananas from to 6 days a week. So I think both of these are great moves to increase nutrition, right? They've also increased allocation in the budget for construction of new classrooms, storage complexes, right? School management and infrastructure items, headers in general. So I think that's also a good thing. Another good thing that we've done is the state education policy. So while the central government has proposed national education policy, the Karnataka government has come up with but it has commissioned for a state education policy report, right? The idea is to localize the curriculum, is to have a different school structure, have a dedicated language policy. I'm sure A lot of us have been hearing about the 2-language policy vis-a-vis the 3-language policy. So the report is out, but now it's sitting at the government's desk, and it has to put out a state education policy based on the committee's report, right? And it's a pretty ambitious goal as well. It targets at about 30% expenditure of the state's budget on education, which is huge, right? So again, I think those are great moves, and we hope that the government makes progress on that. But there's a lot of problems with education in Karnataka, and I really don't know where to start. So one place is vacancies. Vacancies are a big problem in Karnataka. So 62,000 teacher vacancies currently in Karnataka, out of which 50,000 in primary and 12,000 in secondary. Right, so that is huge, right? And while we have so many vacancies, we are still severely underspending, right? So we're spending only 10.8% of our budget on education as of this year. This is vis-a-vis 15%, which is the national average. So we are a full 5 percentage points below the national average. I'm not even talking about other states which are spending more than the national average. So this is not great. This is not a good picture, right? And this is in context of how we are doing in terms of learning. So it's one thing to build schools, it's one thing to build toilets and put in desks and assign teachers and so on. But the real outcome of education is learning. And we have some very troubling statistics in Karnataka, which is that only 2/3 of students in standard 8 in Karnataka can read a standard 3rd level textbook. Right? So only 2/3 can read a standard 3 textbook in standard 8. So that is horrifying, right? And this is also less than the national average, by the way. And the same goes for mathematics as well, right? So if you look at division, only 2/5 of students in class 8 can do division in Karnataka. Can you imagine how sad that is, right? It almost is it's laughable and makes you cry at the same time.
This seems very counterintuitive to me because, I would assume that the southern states perform better than the national average, right? When you say that the spending at national level is 15%, but Karnataka is spending 10%, it sounds very counterintuitive.
Yeah, so the expenditure is counterintuitive, and the performance and the learning outcomes are also counterintuitive. And if you look at the ASER report in detail, you would see that the so-called Bimaro states are actually doing better than Karnataka in these learning outcomes. So we're not in a great place right now, right?
Yeah, but one thing, when you talk about the vacancies, right, the number of teacher vacancies, I would assume that it is also a stock problem, so as to say. These number of vacancies would have been there before, not necessarily in the last 2 years you have had these vacancies, right? Does the report find out how many of the vacancies which were there maybe 2 years back have been closed, or has the number of vacancy increased?
Yeah. So I don't think we can say that the number of vacancies have increased. The government had actually promised that it will fulfill all the vacancies within 1 year, right? So that is one of the promises that we've actually marked as failed, because they promised to fulfill all vacancies within 1 year. It's not that they haven't made progress, right? So about 12,000 Gram Panchayat teachers were given appointment letters this year. But that was as part of a program that the BJP had started in the last term.
Okay.
Right? So there is progress, but it's still a long way to go, right? And at least going by their ambitious promises, they are still, they've fallen by the wayside, so to speak, right? They still have a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah. So another sector which typically is the responsibility of the state governments is health sector, right? And healthcare typically has a lot of positive externalities, as economists will say. It is meritorious in nature. So when it comes to healthcare, what has been some of the commendable measures? What have been some major concerns?
Yeah. So I think as far as health is concerned, one good thing that the government has tried to do is statewide expansion of house delivery of medicines, right? I think this is a great move, keeping in mind, especially the elderly, right? And also keeping women and their mobility in mind. I think that's a great move. The government has also launched a 320 crore mission to end preventable maternal deaths, right? With measures like strengthening obstetric care, digital tools to prevent postpartum hemorrhage, nutrition kits, right? Posting specialists in taluks, right? So I think this is also a very commendable move. There are also other broader pushes to improve rural and taluk level health infrastructure across Karnataka. And they've also taken some commendable steps in improving cancer and neurological treatment, right? I think they've come up with a hub and spoke model for cancer treatment where the spokes can, provide some of the early diagnostics and essential treatments while the hub can take on, slightly more complex tasks, right? So I think and they've also increased the honorariums for ashas and anganwadis, right? Which is also a great move, by the way, because they are critical when it comes to public health and childcare and the rural setup, and supporting them is really important. Right? So these are all very decent moves, very good moves, right, in solving or improving non-communicable diseases, right? House delivery of medicines, great things to do. But there are also some challenges, right? I think one thing is access to free medicines and diagnostics is still something that the government is not able to crack, right? So that's one. The other thing is, just like public education, we also have a lot of vacancies in public health. So one interesting statistic is there are 64% vacancies for surgeons in community healthcare centers, right? And there's a 40% vacancies in specialists in community health centers. So these are large numbers, and meeting these vacancies are also not easy because these are all in rural areas, right, where service is harder and lesser people are interested in serving these areas. But yeah, I mean, so vacancies are a big issue. And we're also, again, just like public education, underspending when it comes to public health. We only spend 4.9% of our state budget vis-a-vis 6.2, which is the national average, right? And I think one major challenge with respect to public health is that 11 district hospitals are about to enter the PPP model for medical colleges. Right? Now, what that means is you're going to have private-public partnership. And our view is that there's no real evidence out there which tells that PPP model works, right? There's no real evidence suggests that they improve, healthcare outcomes, they lead to lesser out-of-pocket expenditure, right? Or they fundamentally lead to better quality treatments. So uh, PPPs are not a great way to go when it comes to health, when it comes to medical treatments, right? So finally, I think our hope and our policy position is we should go towards universalization, right? Where there's greater government presence, right? And medicines and treatments are provided for free, right? At least basic medicines and essential diagnostics are provided for free, right? And essential government hospitals are fundamentally kept public, not private.
So one thing also I noted in your report is you talk about the out-of-pocket expenditure, and that tends to be quite high in the case of Karnataka.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is, when you have public funded health insurance, the idea of health insurance is that it brings down your expenses, right? You don't have to spend a lot on treatment, right? Now that the government is providing insurance. But studies have shown that it actually increases out of pocket expenditure, right? Because now private hospitals have an incentive to push you into a lot of treatments, right? Push you into a lot of other sorts of interventions, right? Which increases your costs on medicines. It increases your costs on the number of outpatient visits you do, right? It increases the cost of travel, right? So your public health insurance will only cover your when you're admitted in the hospital, right? It will only cover a major surgery, right? But it will not cover your medicines. It will not cover your frequent visits to the hospitals. It will not cover your outpatient care, right? So actually, OOP is increasing despite the presence of public funded health insurance. So there's not really a strong case for PFHI that's been propagated in India and in Karnataka.
Yeah. Apart from this, when the current government came into power, in fact, before that, as part of their election campaign, they had talked about implementing 5 guarantees, right? So Annabhagya, Gruha Lakshmi, Gruha Jyoti, Shakti, Yuva Nidhi, right? So these were some of the 5 guarantees. And again, when they came to power, they implemented these things.
Yeah.
And these all refer to schemes like free bus travel for women, some cash transfer to women,
Yeah.
subsidy on power. So over the last 2 years, how has the implementation been? What have been the consequences?
Yeah. I think the five guarantees have been really critical to the way I see it. Have been really critical to the Congress party's victory, right? Because they provided a very clear outcome at the end of that vote. As soon as you vote, you're going to get all these benefits, and it's worked well for them in that sense. But coming to citizens, there is a survey that the Fiscal Policy Institute, which is the government body, commissioned to understand the impact of the five guarantees, right? And broadly, looking at the survey results, it's clear that people have experienced overall welfare outcomes, right? In the sense that they've saved money, right? They have more money in their hands now to spend, right? So quickly, due to Annabhagya, 88% of the respondents of this survey, right, who are mostly BPL and APL families, right, essentially poor families, 88% of them felt that they're having more meals now. Right? They're having more food, which is great. 74% of people are experiencing a saving of up to 500 rupees because of Grah Jyoti, which is your power subsidy, right? Of course, you know that the Guru Lakshmi scheme gives out 2,000 rupees per month to women who are heads of the household, right? Which is again a good amount to have, right? And the survey tells us that women are spending this on health, food, education, loans, repayment of loans, right? 37% women said that they're using it to repay loans. So that tells you something about the rural economy. So overall, there seems to be a good beneficial impact, right? In fact, 88% women felt that their decision-making capacity in the family has improved, which is a good outcome to have, right? So net, it's good. The story is good. However, right, and this is an important however, but there is a trade-off, right? While all of this money and all these savings are great for citizens, it comes at a price, right? And the price ultimately is in a very fiscal sense, right? Currently, the expenditure on the guarantees is about 50,000 crores, right? And the government has entered into a revenue deficit, right? Since it started with the five guarantees. So when people tell us that, hey, how is the government financing this? The answer is, to some extent, it is borrowing. And there is truth in that assertion, right? But also, there are a couple of other things that people say, right? And people like to say that, these are freebies and, these are being simply given to people as doles, and there should be a better way to spend this and so on. And I think that is somewhere where we'd like to contest, right? Our opinion is that the economy has not really rewarded everybody equally. Right? At least since 1991, the economic growth that we had has not been equitable. Right? Yes, some people have surely benefited, and that's evident in Bangalore. Right? When you see the IT sector that's booming and so many people are getting employed. But there is a real problem of unemployment in the rural areas, right? In fact, a study by the World Bank showed that bulk of India, right, almost 40% of India is vulnerable, right? And what does vulnerable mean? It means that they are one income shock away from falling into poverty, right? So technically, they're not poor. Right? Technically, they're not BPL, they're not APL, right? They're above poverty, but they're vulnerable, one shock away, one health emergency away, one loan default away, right? So there is a vulnerable population and they need support, right? And to that extent, these guarantees are great, right? They provide some short-term relief, right? They provide that extra injection of cash. But there is also some merit at the same time in that narrative when people talk about freebies, right? Because if you look at where the state is, right, in terms of its expenditure, as you've discussed, on health, on education, on rural development, we are way behind national average, right? So I think the government's focus has to be, yes, to provide some relief, but it also has to be towards building capacities, right? As Amartya Sen would say, are we building capabilities, right? So that in the future, these families can experience some intergenerational mobility, right? Can the child of a poor woman, through the benefits of a good education and healthcare, transcend that class, that economic class, and go up to the next class, right? And how will that happen? Through expenditures on public health, through expenditures on public education, and so on, right? So that is where there's a clear trade-off, right? Either we borrow money to provide these SOPs, right? Or we borrow money to spend on public health, public education, build up this crucial infrastructure. So I think that is really the Faustian bargain that the government has made, right?
So in fact, I would just want to add a couple of things. What we observe is this is a new trend that is emerging not only in Karnataka but in other parts of the country where cash transfers have become much more common. In fact, in recent Bihar elections also they played a role.
Okay.
So there is cash transfers are being prioritized. Apart from that, there has also been this focus on providing different kind of private goods at a subsidized price. Some commentators, for instance, Devesh Kapoor and all, they have used the term new welfareism for this kind of approach. Ideally, the focus of the state should be on providing public goods and merit goods, but now they are moving into other aspects.
Correct. And I think another perspective is, of course, the idea that it's a compensatory state, right? And that is what the word 5 guarantees conveys. That, hey, these 5 things are guaranteed. You're going to get free electricity, you're going to get free food, you're going to get 2,000 rupees, you're going to get free buses. So that is guaranteed. Everything else is not guaranteed. There's no guarantee that we can do education. There's no guarantee we can do healthcare, right? And that is essentially a compensation, right? That, hey, we can't do all of these things, so here you go, right? And to some extent, I think that is where we've reached, right? The state has failed miserably, but thanks to democracy, right? Thanks to dear democracy, at least there is some money that is reaching the lowest of the lowest, right?
Yeah. So apart from these 5 schemes, what I found interesting in your evaluation was you have a separate section for Bangalore. And since you're analyzing the different sectors, and in that, a specific line item was Bangalore.
Yeah.
Now, this is interesting because typically if I have to perform or if I have to find out the well-being or the state of a particular city, I would look at the city government's reports and evaluate it. But here you have looked at the state government's data, and from that you are trying to find out, okay, what good or bad has happened in the city of Bangalore.
Yeah.
So this kind of also reflects the state local government dynamics that play out in the Indian context.
Absolutely.
For instance, city governments are not as powerful and they're dependent on the states for their revenues, for the different kinds of functions. So do you think the problems that you have identified in the report, they also stem from the state city governance dynamics?
Absolutely. I mean, that structural problem lies at the heart of what's plaguing not just Bangalore, but all the cities in India. I mean, look at Gurgaon, look at Mumbai, look at Pune. And they are in a horrible shape fundamentally because of the constitution's bias towards states. Right? So if you look at the constitution, it says that India is a union of states. Right? So it puts a lot of power into the hands of states and really deprives the third tier. So the third tier of the government, right, be it the municipals or the panchayats, had no presence in the constitution till the 1990s. The only way they were present was because some state governments in the middle, during the 70s and 80s, thought, we should focus on local governance, and that was thanks to their ideology and their ideas. But the constitution has no support for the third tier, right? And even when it came in the form of 73rd and 74th Amendment, I think it was heavily resisted, and it is still resisted, right? So I think, as we popularly know, that power is never given; it is taken, right? So in that sense, I think cities will have to fight, and citizens will have to fight to get some of that power back to cities and to the local level. Because what is happening in Karnataka right now is the deputy chief minister is playing the role of the mayor, right? And Karnataka is a big state, right? It's a very big state, and it needs a deputy chief minister dedicated to the whole state, right? Let the mayor do the job of the city, right? Just ensure that he has sufficient autonomy. Just ensure that he has sufficient funds to run the city, right? Let's just leave the city to itself, and it will take care of itself, right? So that is broadly the problem. I think broadly the two problems that plague Bangalore and all cities in India. One is the lack of devolution of power, right? They need to be empowered. And number two is the lack of planning, right? If you look at the case of Bangalore, Bangalore has not had a constitutionally valid plan since the 90s, right? Well, you had some master plans in the middle. I think we had two master plans, but they were also contested in the courts, and there were questions with their constitutional validity and legal validity, right? And so, probably the reason Bangalore is a mess is because we don't have a plan, right? We don't know where we are building roads. We don't know why we are building the road there, right? We don't know whether an apartment should be here or some other recreational park should be here. So broadly, the mess is because we don't have a constitutional framework that is respected by states.
Since you're talking about the deputy chief minister playing the role of a mayor, people might have a question: what is the mayor doing? So I just want to highlight that Bangalore hasn't had elections for a while now.
Yes.
And yeah,
since 2020.
Yeah, so 5 years we haven't had elections, so that's again very problematic. And but it's not just Bangalore; there are other cities which are also in the same state. So ideally, the way forward should be cities have their own elected representatives. Cities are more, and these representatives have enough power, they have enough resources. But yeah, we are quite far from that state.
I think we should request Zoran Mandani to just talk about Indian municipal elections and Indian municipalities for a bit. Maybe if you could just give a small bite for Bangalore, I think it will make a hell of a difference.
Yeah, so definitely we need someone like that.
Yeah.
Now, again, governments have to operate within some fiscal limits. We talked about the different sectors and how the spending has not been as expected. So governments are not calm. They cannot just spend like that. They have to ensure fiscal discipline. They have to ensure fiscal prudence. So what are some of the key takeaways with respect to Karnataka government's fiscal discipline track record?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is a very simple framework to look at fiscal discipline, at least from a citizen's standpoint, right? And that is the FRBM Act, right? The FRBM Act mandates very clear, limits for how much a state government can spend, right? So, for example, we have something called the revenue deficit, which is how much is the state spending on salaries and subsidies and so on vis-a-vis revenue. Right?
The day-to-day expenditure.
Vis-a-vis how much it's making, right? So ideally it should be zero. Ideally you should be only spending as much as you make, right? But Karnataka has already breached these targets. We are actually borrowing now for everyday expenditure, right? Which includes salaries, wages, and subsidies. That is not a great place to be. Two, there is fiscal deficit, which is your overall borrowing, right? As a proportion of your state's GDP, right? They should ideally be at about 3%, and the government is walking a very tight rope. This year, we're estimated to be at 2.95%, right? So we are very close to hitting our, target, right? And finally, the FRBM mandates that outstanding liabilities should be lower than 25% of your state's GDP, right? Well, in the past, Karnataka has been able to achieve this. And this year, we are very close to the target. Though. We are at 24.9% of the state's GDP. So we're, again, really close to the norm, right? So, yeah, I think the state is really treading a very fine line. Unless it shores up its revenues, we are not headed in the right direction.
In fact, the outstanding liabilities, it has increased 5% compared to the pre-pandemic level. So before the pandemic and now if you compare the numbers, it has increased by 5%.
Right.
And since you're mentioning about revenue deficit, it was a revenue surplus, I think in 2020 to 23. After that, it has been on a revenue deficit. The concern is, for day-to-day expenditure, you should not be borrowing.
Exactly.
You should be able to meet your requirements from your earnings. There are a few more points also when I was looking at your report, right? One is the capital outlay to the total expenditure ratio. Capital outlay means how much you are spending on capital, right? Things which, for instance, infrastructure, right? All these things will get you higher returns in the future. The returns will be much higher. The multiplier effect tends to be high when you're spending on capital. So the capital outlay to total expenditure, that ratio has declined since 2023. So it is a cause of concern because in future you might not get enough returns. Apart from that, committed expenditure to revenue receipts ratio, that has been on the rise. There are certain kinds of expenditure which the governments have to incur. For instance, they have to pay salaries, wages, they have to pay interest on the loans that they have borrowed. So all these things are called committed expenditure. Committed expenditure to revenue receipts basically tells you that whatever revenue you are generating, how much of that you have to definitely pay, definitely spend.
Right.
So this number has increased, which implies that Karnataka government has lower flexibility to spend on other things, maybe health, education. So that also seems to be a cause of concern.
Right. So I think overall, it's a picture where our capital outlay has decreased, but our committed expenditure has increased. Right.
Yeah.
So I think the multiplier effects are going to reduce. Right?
In the future, there might be consequences in case the government is not fiscally prudent.
Yeah.
So now I just want to go back to your initiative, right? So these are some of the interesting findings. In fact, I would request our listeners to go and read the report. We will be sharing the link to the report along with this podcast. Now, during the process of coming up with this report card, did you face any specific challenges? What did you wish for? Like maybe in future, if there is an option for you, let's say there is a genie who is saying, okay, we will do this for you, then what would you want? Are there any limitations in your current findings?
Yeah. I think I would ask the genie to give me 100 interns and give me 100 hours a day so that it could cover all the sectors that are in the manifesto. I think there are almost 500 promises in the manifesto, which is huge. As part of our analysis, we only covered, I think, 134 promises, right? So that's a huge ground to cover, and we'd like to cover all that ground to be able to give a more accurate number of what percentage of promises are fulfilled, right? So I think that's one thing that I'd like to do. And the other thing I'd like is more time from experts, right? I'd ask the genie to just give abundant time to our experts so that they could happily reflect and carefully reflect on what the government has done over the last few years and provide a really succinct but also accurate view of what's happened so far.
And did you face any challenges, or do you think there are any limitations of the findings that you have got right now?
Yeah, I think if you look at something like the manifesto promises, right? So when I say something like the government has only fulfilled 6.7% of the promises, I think it doesn't provide you a lot of insight, right? It doesn't tell you that, oh, okay, this is how the government is doing well, and this is how it's doing badly, and so on. But it still gives you a number, right? It gives you a number to go with, right? And I think for an everyday citizen who's really busy, who's really caught up, right, but who's caught in a political discussion, to be able to say that the government has only fulfilled 6.7% of its promises is powerful, right? It provides them with a certain objective power, right, which is independent, not biased, right, and is steeped in a certain amount of truth, right. But it's not perfect, right, in many ways. Because, for example, as you said, it's not weighted for importance, right. It's also not looking at all the promises in the manifesto across all the sectors, So it's not perfect, but it helps, right, and that's okay. So I think that is one limitation of these numbers, right. But I think it's still useful.
So, Prashant, last thing, apart from reading the reports that you folks come up with, what else can people who are listening to this podcast do?
Yeah, I think they can help us make these reports. So we'll definitely be doing this exercise next year, right? And we'll do 2 exercises next year, actually. So we'll also do a review of the MPs and MLAs of Bangalore, right? We also did that this year, and we're also going to do this next year. And then we'll also do a 3-year review of the government of Karnataka. So we'll need lots of help. We especially need students who have some time on their hands, who want to get their hands dirty in policy and want to understand politics better, right? I think this is a great opportunity, right? So I would request the students who are there, who are still listening, to please reach out to us at civicbangalore@gmail.com, right? And we also have a website, civicspace.in, and you can also search Civic Space Bangalore on Instagram. We're very active on Instagram and on Twitter as well. So find us in every way possible, and we'll try and find you a way to work with us and help us with this initiative.
Thanks, Prashant. It was nice getting insights from you about your initiative and about Karnataka government's performance over the last 2 years. Thanks to our listeners for tuning in. We'll meet in one more episode of All Things Policy.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.